What's up, YouTube? What's up, Twitch chat? We're starting off the day with a fun little set review. It's episode two of, I guess, the Shadow set review. We did one a while back for some other set. It's been pretty inconsistent since then, but might as well do it here because we're here. We got the cards in front of us, at least most of them. There's still some spoilers yet to come, but we've got the majority of the set, so we can kind of talk about how these are going to impact modern, especially the Death Shadow archetype. We'll be kind of touching on a bunch of different cards that I think could see play in modern. Some cards that I don't think will see play, but people are asking about, and then cards that I think like have a chance of seeing some amount of play in a Death Shadow archetype or one of the Death Shadow builds. So we're gonna go through just like scroll down all of it. Shouldn't take too long, but we'll kind of touch base as we go. Then there's a couple spoilers that aren't on here that were leaked in the, or not leaked in, but somebody shared in the Grimflayer Discord. So I'm going to go over those too. But let's just start top down, get going. The first one, a lot of people have asked about, and we'll kind of like zoom in on stuff because it's got the English translation if the card isn't in English. Jace, the Perfected Mind. One of the cards that I've heard some discussion around. So if you haven't seen this one yet, it's 2 blue and then a Phyrexian blue for a completed legendary planeswalker, Jace. Comes in with 5 loyalty. Completed means if you pay the Phyrexian blue with blue mana, you get the full 5 loyalty. If you pay it with 2 life instead, it comes in with 2 less loyalties. It comes in with 3 loyalty. You can +1, give a creature -3/-0 until end of turn, or until your next turn. Important. It's kind of got that Liliana the Last Hope effect to it. -2, target player mills 3 cards. Then if a graveyard has 20 or more cards in it, you draw 3 cards. Otherwise, you draw a card. And then -X, target player mills 3 times X cards. So we'll talk 3 mana, 5 mana. 3 mana and 2 life. This comes in with 3 loyalty. You can start ticking it up to hopefully like shrink a dude out of attack range, which does come in with like a fairly good loyalty count. Come in with 5, tick up to 6. This is like Oko esque on the loyalty side, not on the ability side. The -2, you can only do it one time if it comes in with 3. If they've got 20 cards in your library, then it's 3 mana, they mill 3, and you get to Visions of Beyond. But the mill like already plays Visions of Beyond. So I don't think you want 3 mana, mill 3 plus Visions when you can just have like 1 mana Visions. And then -X, 3 times X cards, comes in with 3 loyalty. 3 mana, mill 9 is a really, really bad rate for mill. So mill's already paying or playing 3 mana, mill 14 in was it Fraying Sanity, something like that. Or 3 mana for Tasha's Hideous Laughter that could be mill anywhere between 15 and 40, depending on what you're up against. Mill's already not playing Glimpse the Unthinkable, 2 mana mill 10. So 3 mana mill 9 is a pretty bad rate. At 4 mana, coming in with 5 loyalty, ticking up with or to 6 is a little bit better. You can activate the -2 twice. So if it comes in at 4 loyalty, your opponent's got 20 cards in their graveyard or 17 or more, then getting 2 back-to-back Visions of Beyond is pretty cool for refilling your hand. And then -X, so it'd be 3 times 5, 15 cards. 4 mana for 15 is still bad rate because you could just pay 3 mana for 14, so 1 less mana, 1 less card. Or you could pay like double Glimpse the Unthinkable and pay 4 mana for 20 cards instead of 15. So I still think like the -X is bad rate regardless of which amount you play it at. the +1's like okay. Getting to stop your opponent's Ragavan or something every turn is kind of nice, but I think most modern decks have something that outsizes that pretty quick, whether it be Murktide, Shadow, uh, Kavu, Scion. I guess Scion of Draco's neutral. Um, Primeval Titan, bunch of stuff in the format that just kind of outpace that. The -2 is good if your opponent has 20 cards in their graveyard, but you're already running a deck that sometimes runs Leyline of the Void, so it exiles instead of being in the graveyard, or Tasha's Hideous Laughter that exiles on resolution. So there's a pretty good chance that like your opponent might not have 20 cards in their graveyard, and then if they do, if you have hit them with like a Fraying Sanity and an Archive Trap or something, you're paying 3 mana to mill 3 instead of paying 3 mana to kill your opponent, and that's always, I'd say always, like 98% of the time, if you've got the mana to kill your opponent and you play something that doesn't kill your opponent, you're just giving them unnecessary turns that can turn around and bite you. So my 2 cents is don't play it. Play something that's going to actually kill your opponent instead. But that's just my humble non-mill player opinion. We've got a. Actually, let me shut this door real quick. Hear a lawnmower outside. I don't know if y'all can hear it or not, but 2 seconds. All right. Uh, Going down the list, most of this stuff that's like 4 or 5 mana, if it doesn't have a way to reduce the cost, probably not seeing play. Um, Now, I will admit, I have not looked over a ton of these at like 4 or 5 mana. I've looked over like the Planeswalkers, I've looked over the Mythics, but if it doesn't do something just absolutely insane, it's probably not worth it. So a lot of the ones that are not in English, like I'll probably go back through when they do come out in English, but until then, I'm kind of skipping over most of them. Like think about the 4 or 5 mana spells that resolve in modern. You're talking like Scape Shift, Bring to Light, Primeval Titan, Teferi Hero of Dominaria, and then you have the cost reducers or the cheat in cards like Murktide, Archon, uh, Creativity, cards that win you the game or put it to where you're probably not losing. So just keep that in mind when you look at like a 4 or 5 mana card and say like, oh, that's cool. That gets some value. Like if it doesn't win you the game, skip it. Go to the next one. At least in modern. If you want to play it in standard, go play it in standard. Ickermoon Gauntlet. This is the first part of this text basically doesn't matter in the slightest. So it gives your planeswalkers like pay 0 loyalty, proliferate, pay 12 loyalty, take an extra turn after this way. Doesn't, or take an extra turn after this one. Doesn't really matter. The second line of text, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a counter on target permanent, put an additional counter of that kind on a, or choose a counter on a permanent, put an additional counter that on that permanent. I saw somebody in Aspiring Spikes chat talking about like Dice Factory, Tron, decks like that that care a lot about counters. This could be an interesting addition. I don't know enough about that deck. I just wanted to point out the card since Spike seemed to at least take notice of it. So just know that, that card's there. Koth, Fire of Resistance. Another nice little planeswalker. So Koth is 2 and 2 red, 4 loyalty, +2, search for a basic mountain, reveal it, put it into your hand. -3 deals damage to target creature equal to the number of mountains you control. Then -7, you get an emblem with whenever a mountain enters the battlefield, deals 4 damage to anything. I was thinking of this card in comparison to Chandra Torch of Defiance. Like, same mana cost. I don't think it's as good as Chandra, but if you're just looking for like an additional red win condition planeswalker in your prison deck, then I think this is fine. Like, I think you'd rather have Chandra because her plus giving you the chance of hitting like actual spells, but at the same time, this is a planeswalker that comes down on turn 4 or earlier if you're like ritualing or whatever, Ragavan. And then you ultimate 2 turns. Yeah, 2 turns later. Play it on 4, tick up to 6. Next turn, tick up to 8. Turn after that, emblem, and you can play the mountain that you got the turn before. So you get an emblem plus like 4 damage to something. And it's just like a fairly consistent clock. It's got good loyalty total. Um, I don't think it's like a card you're throwing in your Jund mid range deck or anything like that. But if you're playing basically just like mono red prison, this gives you an alternate win condition. But I wouldn't go too crazy thinking it's gonna like break modern. All right, so now that we've gotten to toxic, I want to talk about this a little bit just so people are aware. Toxic is not infect. You get poison counters the same way, but this is not a 4/4 that deals 4 poison damage. Regardless of how big these toxic cards get, they give 1 poison counter if it's toxic 1, 2 if it's toxic 2. So when people talk about like including some of these toxic cards in infect, keep that in mind. You can pump this up to an 18/18, still dealing 1 poison counter. Now, obviously, some of these have extra line on them, like, hey, it hits you, or hit somebody, they proliferate, give extra poison counters, whatever. But I just want to point out before we get to more of the spoilers, in case I skip over something that has toxic, like, hey, it's not a 1-for-1 trade off from infect to toxic. Next card on the list, Skrelv. Skrelv Defector Might. So 1 white, 1/1, toxic 1, can't block. Pay a Phyrexian white, tap it, choose a color. Another target creature you control gains toxic 1 and hexproof from the color until end of turn. It can't be blocked by creatures of that turn, or creatures of that color this turn. So the comparison here is obviously like Giver of Runes. They've got highlighted down here. If you're playing a white-based Shadow deck and you're running Ranger Captain of Eos and Giver of Runes already, then I think Skrelv is like a lateral upgrade. I don't think it's a vertical upgrade. I don't think it's like an improvement. It's just different. So one of the advantage Skrelv has is it does have like that little bit of synergy with Shadow of being able to pay life so you can grow your shadows, attack through with an unblocked Shadow, which protection can do that as well. One of the big differences, though, is Giver of Runes giving protection means you can play your creatures out defensively. Play something out, my opponent goes to attack in, I block, give it protection, and I get a blowout there. This does not give you protection. So if your opponent does attack in, you cannot use Skrelv defensively. Also can't use it for like red based wrath effects. So my opponent casts an Anger of the Gods. This gives hexproof and it can't be blocked. It does not prevent damage from that color. So red based wrath against your board of like Ragavans and Darcy's and 2/2 shadows or whatever, they're still all going to die regardless of it if you Skrelv. So just keep that in mind if you're thinking about, oh, Skrelv is just like a strict upgrade for Giver. It's not a strict upgrade. It's different. It's got some pluses. It's got some minuses. It's also the fact that you always have to pay the mana. So if you are like tight on mana in a game, it could be a case where you can't activate Skrill because you don't have the mana, you can't pay the life. This card I thought was interesting. Vindictive Flamestoker. 1 red, 1/2. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on it. 6 and a red, sack it, discard your hand, then draw 4 cards. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each oil counter on Vindictive Flamestoker. So I was thinking about this card in like a storm kind of shell where you're going off on your turn. You play out this Flamestoker. You play all your non-creature stuff, your rituals, whatever, and then eventually you just get to like sack this and ditch your hand to your Past in Flames, draw 4 new cards. So it kind of stops you from fizzling out. Do I think it's going to go into like a gift storm shell? Probably not. But if there is another uh, like green red storm kind of deck, or Dragon's Rage Channeler, Mishra's Bauble kind of storm shell, then I just think this is like an interesting piece to know is around. It's basically only good on the turn that you're like storming off, but it could keep some decks like that from fizzling. All the new Twilights are pretty bad. Like all sorcery, or I guess the black one's instant, but I think all the other ones are sorcery. And they all have like a really subpar X. Then if you get more than 5, then you get some cool effect. But a 7 mana sorcery or instant in modern's probably not breaking anybody's back. Going down, going down, going down. Thrun, I think Old Thrun's just like better. It's a mana less for the same effect. Hexproof from everything instead of just green spells. And then the paying to give it indestructible is fine. I don't think the other one has trample, but I don't think I want to pay the extra mana just for trample. All right, so getting into some interesting cards over here. Skrelv's Hide, the new Bitter Blossom style card. So 1 in white enchantment. Getting if your upkeep, you lose a life. Create a 1/1 Phyrexia Might artifact creature token with toxic 1, and it can't block. Corrupted, as long as an opponent has 3 or more poison counters, creatures you control with toxic have lifelink. So I think this is a card that could slot into like your mono white token deck pretty easily. We saw those running around a bit before with like Force of Virtue. I think that's the name of the white flash enchantment, and some of the other like intangible virtue style cards. This just gives you like another aggressive piece, so you don't have to go black for Bitter Blossom to get a continual token stream. The downside, not being able to block, is very, very relevant. So if you know Bitter Blossom, if you've played Bitter Blossom before, you know one of the strongest aspects of that card is being able to make a 1/1 blocker every single turn if your opponent's playing big things like Tarmogoyf or Thought Not See or whatever. You just get to like fog that for as long as you need to. This does not give you that aspect. It does kill faster than Bitter Blossom, since you only have to hit your opponent for 10 instead of 20, since all these little mites have toxic 1. Where Bitter Blossom, I think, is like a 6-turn clock. This is probably like a 5-turn, 4-turn. Let's see. Turn 1, you play it. Turn 2, make a 1/1. Turn 3, attack for 1, make another 1/1. Turn 4, attack for 2. I guess no, it's like 6 turns. I guess Bitter Blossom is, I don't know. I'll have to look it up. Either way, not having to have as many tokens to attack through is something. The lifelink part on the toxic aspect means it's probably not seeing play in your shadow decks. Like if you're wanting this effect, Bitter Blossom is almost strictly better. but I think this is one that could help like mono white tokens. Unctus, Grand Metatect. If you know Grand Architect, card that made blue steel possible for a brief moment, this is a card that I could see getting play in like a blue steel style deck. I don't play those decks, so I do not know for sure. But anything that has to do with like artifact creatures getting pumped and blue creatures getting an effect, then it's at least worth keeping an eye on, since it does allow you to play a Phyrexia blue or pay a Phyrexia blue instead of any of the mana requirements of like Grand Architect. You can just pay 2 life, make something blue, attack, draw and discard, which is pretty sweet as opposed to Grand Architect. So maybe it helps with getting blue steel back into the mix. We already know Phyrexian Arena, Venerated Lock for Rot Priest. This card's been talked about a lot. It is potentially going into Infect. 1 green, 1/2, Toxic 1. Whenever a creature you control becomes the target of a spell, target opponent gets a poison counter. So I do want to talk about like the nut hand with this card, so that people at least know, all right, if I see it, this is what I need to be concerned about. The nut hand would be something like turn 1 Glistener Elf. I don't cast my bolt because I've got 1 removal spell. I don't want to die to a blighted agent. Turn 2, they play a Rot Priest. They go to attack. I go to bolt. I get a poison counter. They mutagenic growth or they groundswell their Glistener Elf. I get another poison counter because I targeted their dude with the bolt. I got 1 off the Rot Priest. They targeted their guy with a groundswell. They get a counter, or I get a counter off the Rot Priest. I'm now at 2 with a 6 or 5/5 swinging at me. They've got a mutagenic growth. I go up to 3, and now I've got 3 poison with a 7/7 swinging at me. I'm dead. So it's not some insane sequence of events that could get this up to a very reasonable card. But if you're playing correctly and like bolting the what's it called, Glistener Elf or whatever before this, then you're probably fine. Also, you never really have to worry about your opponent attacking with this. Like, if my opponent attacks with a Venerated Rot Priest and I say no blocks and they go mutagenic, groundswell, become immense, then I'd say, cool, I'll take 2, 4, 8, 14, 15. I'll take 15 and 4 poison counters, 5 poison counters. Like, I'm not dead to either one of those things. And double mutagenic groundswell become immense should absolutely kill me with an infect creature. So keep that in mind. This is not an attacker. This is a fight with your dude inside of combat buff. And I feel like Infect would rather just have like another protection spell, another pump spell, something like that. But we'll see. I just think it's good for people to be aware of like what the card can do. Like, just know that it pumps on, if you're playing Infect, it pumps on your own spells as well. That's kind of the important part. Mercurial Spell Dancer. I just wanted to point this card out because it's a rogue. I don't think it has a bunch going for it, but it's a 1 in a blue, 2/1, can't be blocked. You cast a non-creature spell, you put an oil counter on it. If it deals combat damage and it's got 2 or more oil counters, you can remove 2. And the next time you cast an instant or sorcery, copy it. So I could see a world that maybe this fits into like a rogue's shell. You play this, you opt, whatever, next turn you play it. Consider drown in the lock to counter a spell, copy it, kill a guy, or like copy it into the story. It's different. Like, I'm only pointing it out because it's a rogue, and rogue is a card or a creature type that needs some help. It kind of died off with the Luris ban. So, do I think it's going to see play? Absolutely not. Do I think the fact that it's a rogue at least helps it be in the consideration? Yeah. There's not a ton of good rogues. All right. The card everybody wants to know about, Minor Misstep. So, I've got to start off this brief little rant with saying this is not mental misstep. Do not put this in the same sentence as mental misstep. Don't don't think this is like ban worthy or this is an auto 4 of in every deck or anything even remotely like that, because this is so far under mental misstep, it's embarrassing. Now, we're going to get to a couple redeeming qualities, but let's talk about the differences first. So the thing that made mental misstep so good, if you haven't played with mental misstep before, and I am a huge supporter of the idea that mental misstep is okay in modern. Should it be unbanned? No. It needs to stay on the ban list. Do I want mental misstep in the format? Yes. Either way, misstep was so good because you could play for mental misstep in your mono red deck or your mono white deck or your red black deck, whatever. So people would always come up with that argument of like, oh, it's a free 4 of. And it looks so good because on the draw, before I played my land drop, I can counter my opponent's Utopia Sprawl or Expedition Map, Goblin Guide, nowadays Ragavan, Esper Sentinel, Aether Vial, whatever Thought Seas, whatever the case may be. And that's fine. Or the time really, really good. This can't do that on the draw. This is okay, I need to have this on the play turn 1, and then they need to play a 1-mana spell. And if they don't play a 1-mana spell, I have to decide, is my opponent going to play on curve from now on? Are they going to play a 2-mana spell on 2, a 3-mana spell on 3, 4-mana on 4, and this is completely dead? Or am I time walking myself every single turn and playing a land down because I'm holding up minor misstep, hoping that my opponent plays a 1-mana spell? The upside is this does say or less, so you can counter your opponent's like EE on 0. You can counter Chalice on 0. You can counter Cascade targets. So there's like a little bit of flexibility there. Um, it counters Veil of Summer for what it's worth. I don't think this card is nearly as good as Flusterstorm. Um, I again don't even think they're in the same league. Flusterstorm gets to not only hit your opponent's Cascade spell, it also gets to dodge their mental or their mystical dispute on the way back, dodge their force negation on the way back. It also hits their fire and ice, their creativity. It hits let's prismatic ending for more than one, March of Otherworldly Light for more than one, expressive iteration, Archmage's Charm, counter spell, um, Drown in the Lock. We can keep going down this list, but I think you kind of get the idea. Uh, it's better versus Hammer, sure, but you're not playing like a counter spell versus Hammer. You counter spells are bad versus Hammer because of Urza's Saga and Stoneforge Mystic, and this doesn't touch either of those cards. So like having it good against a matchup where counter spells are already bad is uh versus hammer you counter Stoneforge, Mystic, and Paladin, sure, which this card doesn't do either of those things. Dress down pseudo does, drown in the lock can, so keep that in mind. It also doesn't touch like Sanctifier on deck. But we also have to keep in mind that a lot of the decks that Mental Misstep used to really keep in check either A are like non-existent nowadays, or B have converted so much that they're no longer weak to Mental Misstep. Prime example, Burn. Mental Misstep used to be really good at Burn because you counter Goblin Guide, Swift Spear, Bolt, Lava Spike, what was it? Shard Volley, the one red, sack a land, deal 3. Uh, but nowadays the deck is converted to like Boros Charm, Lightning Helix, Skewer the Critics, Rift Bolt, Eidolon, Sanctifier on Vec post board. Like there's so many fewer targets for a misstep card that you just run the risk of your opponent like never seeing one drops and running you over while you're sitting with this misstep in hand, like wondering what you're doing. Where Flusterstorm could hit a ton of those spells. So all that to say, unless you're playing like some hyper tempo-y Delver deck that I don't think exists, don't play Minor Misstep. Path to Exile's like dead in the format. Everybody's playing Prismatic Ending, Solitude, which dodge this. Because your opponent can always just like Prismatic Ending for an extra mana if they think you have Misstep. They don't have to play into it. Path to Exile's dead. Thoughtseize is on life support. Like the Thoughtseize decks are already cutting Inquisition, so you have less targets for Misstep. Um, Decks like Murktide, you don't really lose to Ragavan and Darcy most of the time. You lose to like Murktide, Archmage's Charm, Counterspell, Unlicensed Hearse, which this doesn't touch. Aether Vial decks are dead, so you're not getting Aether Vial targets. Not that that's a great reason to have Mental Misstep in, but you get the idea. Yeah, then just the fact that like if you're not on the play, this gets exponentially worse because all of your opponent's plays that you want to counter are going to be on turn 1. And so if your opponent plays like their Esper Sentinel on 1, their Sigarda's Aid on 1, uh, whatever the case may be, Amulet of Vigor, and you're on the draw, then this just looks like embarrassingly bad. So keep that in mind if you were even looking at Minor Misstep. All right, let's keep going down. What's the next card on the list? Drowning Acre's like a sorcery, -4/-4, and proliferate. I don't think it's better than what is it, Grasp in Darkness? It's like Grasp of Darkness. It's 2 black, -4/-4 at instant speed, but similar cost, similar effect. Had to at least mention it. Gleeful Demolition, sack an artifact or destroy an artifact. If you sack one of your own, essentially you make 3/1/1s. I know there's like a Pauper card that plays a similar effect. Obviously, this is not Pauper legal, but maybe Modern needed an extra one of those to somehow make the Pauper variant playable in Modern. Most of this other stuff is pretty bad, or at least there's like better versions already legal in the format. So we can skip over a lot of this stuff. Again, I'll go back through when like the English translations are out, but I don't really want to go through like every single non-English card. So I think the next thing up is the Planeswalkers or like the multicolored cards. Yeah. All right. So we mentioned Jace already, and we talked about what completed means on Planeswalkers. So if you pay the mana, like actual physical colored mana, you get the extra 2 loyalty. If you don't pay it, if you pay the life, it comes in with 2 less loyalty. Nahiri, I thought was a pretty coolly designed planeswalker. So let's think about the upside. The upside is the +1 is goad one of your opponent's creatures, make them attack into a bad block. Looks cool. It's also got a +1 that gives you a little bit of card selection. You get to loot away a card. The 0, I actually think is pretty interesting on this card. So 0, exile target creature or equipment card with mana value less than Nahiri's loyalty from your graveyard. It has to be less than, not less than or equal to. So you can't 0 and like copy a batter skull right away. Create a token that's a copy of it. That token gains haste, exile at the beginning of the next end step. So the obvious straight up comparison or value target off this is Stoneforge Mystic, which goes great with the core theme of Nahiri and equipment and blah blah blah. But 3 mana, 0 it, reanimate a Stoneforge Mystic, essentially get a copy. It gets haste, so if you play this on 3, tick up, goad one of your opponent's creatures into attacking. Turn 4, you 0 it, get back your Stoneforge Mystic that you blocked with on turn 2. Go get a Cauldra, immediately activate Stoneforge and put Cauldra into play. Like, that's pretty sick if you're playing a red white equipment matters kind of Stoneblade deck already. Uh, Not to mention the fact that you can like play this turn 2 off a Ragavan, and it's pretty decent. I don't think it like is good enough to just create some new deck, but we've played like Mardu Stone or Mardu Shadowblade on stream before, and I'll definitely try out 1 or 2 of these in Mardu Shadowblade because you get to like make your opponent attack into a shadow. That's really good for you. The looting is fine, and then being able to make a copy of like a shadow late game, Stoneforge, Ragavan. Uh, you can make a Darcy if you just need like a flying attacker, whatever the case may be. Um, I think that could be kind of interesting and cool. White doesn't really have a lot of good reanimate style effects, so being able to reanimate a Stone Forge is non-zero. Luca, I think, is like bad Garuk. So it's 2 a red, a green, and then a Phyrexian red or green. Let's say it comes in with 3 loyalty. So 2 a red and a green. Comes in with 3 loyalty. +1, add red, green, spend only to cast creature spells or activate abilities of creatures. If you know Garuk's plus, it's untap 2 lands. So Garuk, you can use the mana for whatever. This, you can only use it to cast creatures or activate abilities of creatures. -1 makes it 3/3 with Toxic 1. Garuk's minus makes it 3/3 Beast. Same idea, just without the Toxic. And then -4, Luca deals X damage to any number of target creatures or planeswalkers equal to the greatest power of creatures you control. Garuk's minus is like an overrun or something. So this, if it comes in with 3 loyalty, if you pay the life, you can't even use the ultimate right away. And then you've got like a pretty bad plus to set up the ultimate. So ultimately, I think this planeswalker is pretty bad. Kaito. I actually personally like Kaito, but it's got like one specific deck I could even remotely see going in, and that's Modern Fairies. So let's break it down. 2 blue and a black, 3 loyalty. Kaito has a static ability. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you may return one of them to its owner's hand. If you do, you may activate loyalty abilities of Kaito twice this turn rather than only once. +1, up to 1 target creature can't attack or block until your next turn. 0, draw a card. -2, create a 2/2 colorless drone artifact creature token with Death Touch, and when this creature leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. So I say fairies because I have this really cool vision in my mind of spell stuttering my opponent's spell, attacking them with spell stutter, uh playing Kaido first, attacking the spell stutter, bouncing the spell stutter back to hand, get to activate Kaido twice. I can say one of your guys can't attack back next turn, and I get to draw a card. I get my spell stutter back in hand. I can use this with like Bitter Blossom tokens to draw extra cards, Vendilion Click, Mistbind Click, Mutavault if I haven't made a land drop, whatever. I think the card's like kind of fun in that one deck. I don't think it really goes into anything else. But if you're playing fairies and you're already playing like Jace the Mind Sculptor, then it could be kind of like a lateral move. We'll play and then you're on the draw. That's fine if it's just like 1 mana to activate Mutavault, attack in, draw 2 cards, replay your Mutavault, and hold up a counter spell. Like Tyvar, Jubilant Brawler. So 1 black and a green, 3 loyalty. You can activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. +1, untap up to 1 target creature. -2, mill 3 cards. Then you may return a creature with mana value 2 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. So the level 0 throw in for Tyvar is like your devoted druid deck because you get to haste up your druid that you top deck, which that's one of the biggest drawbacks of that deck is having a summoning sick devoted druid and just like losing out because your opponent had a removal spell right there. It fights with the post-mortem lunge, the black like reanimate style effect, but you can use his minus multiple times. So like come in. I see the high upside of this card being like turn 1 mana dork, turn 2 Tyvar, untap your mana dork, hold up like Veil of Summer, Path to Exile, something like that. And then turn 3 going for like Devoted Druid. Uh, you can tap it right away. You can untap the Devoted Druid to itself, tap it, untap with Tyvar. So you've got 2 mana floating, 1 land mana dork, 2 mana floating. You can cord for 3 right there. Let me make sure that's right. Mana dork is 1. Devoted Druid tapping is 2. Your land open is 3. 1 short. Just Eldritch Evolution away your birds. You're fine. Go get your Vizier and then just like go off from there. So kind of an interesting upside. The downside is it is like a 3 mana sorcery speed planeswalker that doesn't directly do anything. It just kind of makes your devoted druids a little bit better, your mana dorks, whatever you got to activate, a little tiny bit better. It's cool. I could also see if we make it somewhere in the future that shadow decks are playing more activated ability creatures, then it's like a 3 mana planeswalker that reanimates anything in your shadow deck. If you're playing like Grim Lava Mancers or something comes around with an activated ability, then I think it's just nice to know that this card exists, even if you don't end up playing it. I wanted this Jor card to be good. It's not. All right, Glissa. Glissa Sunslayer. If you ever played the old Glissa, then you might know how the old one you got to like reanimate baubles and or not baubles, Nihil spell bombs and stuff. This does not do that. So 1 a black and a green, 3/3 first strike death touch. So it's like almost always getting in on the attack. When it deals combat damage to a player, choose 1. Either you draw a card and lose a life, pretty good. You destroy an enchantment, reasonable. Remove 3 up to 3 counters from target permanent. So you could like minus or hit them, knock off a planeswalker or something. This is like Ragavan though that you have to hit them to get the effect. You can't hit the Planeswalker and then take 3 loyalty off the Planeswalker. So yeah, you can remove counters off Murktide, off of uh what's his name, Ledger Shredder, anything like that. But I think the fact that it's like a 3 mana 3/3 with first strike and death touch at least makes it so it's very difficult to block. So the fact that you've got uh, these abilities on it that you're almost assuredly going to reliably get is the only reason that I'm like looking at it more. Counter from Saga next level, or you could just like blow up their Saga. I take counters off of it when you can just get it off the board. But blow up Sigarda's Aid, uh, blow up Saga, whatever. Kind of an interesting one. Malira, if you're afraid of Infect going crazy, then Malira could be an option. I think the old Malira is better against Infect, don't get me wrong. New one says, like, if you get more than one counter, you get one instead. And then you can exile it and return a creature or artifact from your that would be put into the graveyard this turn. You return it to the battlefield instead. So like sack a bauble, get a bauble back. Sack an EE, get an EE back on 0. Um, if you got a creature that's like a removal spell or something, then you can sack Malaria, get it back. Got a little line of text here and there. Never getting to face first hammer. I mean, if they're blocking your 3/3 first strike death toucher, like that's pretty good for you too, right? Like, hey, if you got to block this thing every turn, that means you're throwing stuff in front of it. That's also a win. Blah blah blah. The new sword I think is pretty bad. So this is the red green protection sword. It is +2/+2 pro red pro green. Whenever a quick creature deals combat damage to a player, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. So it gives you what's that stupid card called? The Spectacle. Exile the top 2, and then you can play an additional land this turn. Not great. Like pretty meh. Like if you're playing this, you're playing it for the pro red. I think if you're playing it for the pro red, then Fire and Ice is just better. Staff of Complete. I wanted to be bad. It is worse than Light Up the Stage. It's just repeatable. Like Light Up the Stage, you get to cast until your next turn, and it's only 1 mana. But just the fact that it's repeatable makes it comparable, but not better. Staff of Completion. I wanted to be good because I saw like, oh, tap, don't pay a mana cost, pay a bunch of life. But the 1, 2, and 3 are terrible. Like destroy target permanent you own, no synergy in shadow whatsoever. Pay 2 life, add 1 mana of any color. I don't care about a 3 mana rock. Pay 3 proliferate. Proliferate does nothing for us. Pay 4 life, draw a card. That's like cool the first time, and then after that you probably can't afford to do it again. So it's 3 mana, pay 4 life, draw a card, and you're never untapping it. So just get that out of your mind. Stuff. Soulless Jailer. Grafdigger's Cage on a stick. So permanent cards and graveyards can't enter the battlefield. Players can't cast non-creature spells from graveyards or exile. Important to note, it does not say that it doesn't say that cards can't enter the battlefield from libraries. So it's not Grafdigger's Cage, but I wanted to point it out just because it is tutorable with things like Court of Calling or Collected Company, something like that. So if you're in like a creature based deck, a chord style deck, and you're looking for a piece of Grave Hate, maybe you can't play what's the name, Yixlid Jailer or something like that. Just this card exists. Again, I think most decks that have a spot that they want to devote to something like that have something that they can play instead. But it's just good to know that cards like this exist. So if you're playing against a Court of Calling deck and this card would screw you over, just know that it's there. Coming for your soul. The new spell bombs are really, really bad. I'm going to open them just for the sake of showing them all, but they're pretty terrible. So they're not spell bombs, they're skull bombs. Whatever. You can pay one, sack and draw a card, just like the old ones. Then they have an additional line of text on here. So 2 and a white, sack it. Target creature you control gets +2/+2 and gains flying until end turn. Draw a card. So you get both effects, the +2/+2 and flying and the draw card. Activate only as a sorcery. Why they included that line of text on there, I have no idea. It doesn't just suddenly like make this card playable without it, but that just like killed most any shot. Because you go down the list and it's like, oh, here's Aether Spellbomb. Bounces a card or a creature to its owner's hand. Draw a card. Activate only as a sorcery. So you can't like whir for this and make it a combat trick. Sag it, return creature from your graveyard to your hand. Draw a card. Activate only as a sorcery. Blah, blah, blah. Put oil counters on something. Draw a card only as a sorcery. Why they made the white one and the green one both give flying, I have no idea. But they're terrible. Don't play them. The Fastland reprints, I think, is huge for people that play a lot of paper. It doesn't matter so much online, but if you play paper, then now's a great time to pick up your Fastlands or like a couple weeks after the set drops. Then looking at a few of these rare lands. The first one is the new land type Sphere. So you can tap it for a colorless, tap to add a mana of any color, and then 3 tap it, make a 1/1 might token with Toxic 1. I don't think it's better than like any land that has a similar effect that's already being played. If you're thinking not only man lands, but like Castle Vantress. Like, I don't think you're playing this over Castle Vantress, but maybe if you're in a non-white deck and you really want some land that can make tokens, sure, it exists. Move oil counters, doesn't really matter. Seed Core, the new fixed Pendlehaven. So 1 tap to add a colorless, tap to add 1 mana of any color, spend only to cast Phyrexian creature spells, which all the infect creatures are Phyrexian creatures now. And then Corrupted, target 1/1 creature gets +2/+1 until end of turn. Activate only if an opponent has 3 or more poison counters. So that's the part that's like Pendlehaven-esque. Pendlehaven gets +1/+2 instead of +2/+1. But the important distinction is Pendlehaven taps for green. This doesn't tap for green unless you're casting a creature. This is unplayable in Infect. Colorless mana is not your bottleneck. Like, it's always going to be green mana. You're already playing Inkmoth Nexus. You can't afford to have too many colorless producing sources. Mycosynth Garden. So tap it, add a colorless. 1, tap it, add a mana of any color. And then X, tap it, becomes a copy of target non-token artifact you control with mana value X. I was trying to think of lines where this would like help out an Amulet Titan. I don't think there's a ton. Like, I think this is a win more card for Amulet Titan because most of the lines come from like, oh, if you've got Arboreal Grazer, land Arboreal Grazer into this, like turn 2, play an Amulet and a bounce land and copy it and play another Arboreal Grazer and heard their lines for turn 2 kills and Amulet. Of course there are. You could absolutely like turn 2 with somebody, but you have to have just like this nut string of draws that would already be fantastic without this. So this is just like, so a nut draw with this would be something like Forest Arboreal Grazer, put this in, turn 2, play an amulet off your forest, play a bounce land, pick up your bounce land, play another amulet off your bounce land, second Arboreal Grazer, put your bounce land back in, copy your amulet, Azusa, uh, Titan, something like that, kill them. But then you just have like double amulet, Azusa, Arboreal Grazer, Titan. You don't need this. And then like you can't copy Saga constructs. Same thing, like you said with Hammer. I don't think Hammer wants this because anything you're copying, you just already have, and you don't really need additional copies of it. Plus, a deck like Hammer Time is already constrained on white mana when you're playing things like Sanctifier on Vec on 2. So, the more colorless sources you add on top of your Ink Moths and Urza's Sagas is a pretty big liability. Maybe there's some like value artifact deck that finds some use for it somewhere. I have no idea. I see the best this being like tap it, copy a welding jar or something, maybe in your uh, hardened scales deck. But again, don't think it does a ton. All these are like one in whatever color sack it, draw a card, but they all enter tapped. So they're pretty whatever. They're all fears, right? I know they're fair. Whatever. Showcase stuff is whatever. This is all commander stuff. And then there were 2 more cards that I just wanted to point out that I saw people spoiling or showcase in the Grim Flare Discord. Maybe copy welding jar in scales calls jar doesn't tap. Right, like that's about the best I see the card being. All right, this dude I thought was kind of cool. This little exuberant fuseling. So trample, 1 red, 0/1 trampler, gets +1/+0 for each oil counter on it. ETB, whenever another creature or artifact you control is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on it. I could see some little terrible line with like, um, what's it called? Mishra's Bauble and Underworld Breach, Dragon's Rage Channeler. Also, tokens hit the graveyard. So, like turn 1, Ragavan. Turn 2, play this guy, sack your treasure to cast something else. It gets bigger. And then the other dude is this Phyrexian Exemplar, 4 white, 5/5 flyer. If damage would be dealt to Phyrexian Exemplar, prevent that damage. When damage is prevented this way, it deals that much damage to any target. Somebody mentioned this card, or mentioned that Spite mentioned it as a card to sideboard against Murktide and Hammer Time. So you just like throw this out there. Murktide's going to have a really difficult time to get it off the board. But you stick it around, dodges bolt. If they unholy heat it, you get to kill something back. They attack into it, you block and kill something, or just hit them in the face. Whatever. It's a cool card. Shadow card, not really, but if you're in like a heavy white deck, sure. Let's see. Another Pioneer card. 0/1 is unplayable in Modern until Wrenn and 6 gets banned. Well, we say that, but like Ragavan and Dragon's Rage Channeler see a pretty good bit of play. And this does have the potential of like it plus Mishra's Bauble outgrows Wrenn and 6. So it's not the craziest thing. Do I think it's going to see play? Or no, it doesn't outgrow Wrenn and 6 because it only gets +1/+0, not +1/+1. But do I think it's going to see play? Probably not. Do I think it's just interesting because it's a 1 mana card that has potential to grow a lot? Sure. And I think that's about it. I think that's all the cards that I wanted to cover. If you see anything else that you think is interesting, feel free to send it to me. Otherwise, few cards that I think might see some like niche play here and there. I don't think there's anything format warping in the set, which I think is fine to not have or to have a set that doesn't have 50 cards that are redefining the format, but we'll see how it goes.